So thank you very much for joining the session. My name is Muneeb Ahsan. I lead enterprise transformation across EMEA for AWS. I work with some of our customers that are looking to either adopt cloud or maximize value from cloud. This presentation is really based from the vantage point of the learnings across some of our key transformation programs. But it's also from the vantage point of that person that probably had 1,000 tabs in Excel open and umpteen numbers of pizza slices 4 o'clock in the morning to create that one metric for the CIO that says he's going to save X or she is going to save X percentage. And you think that's all the number that's there. But behind that, there's a huge story. There's a huge unknown or unspoken journey of how those numbers were created and really what the patterns were. So today, allow me to share it from that vantage point. You'll gain 3 things today. The first thing you'll gain today is identifying savings to reinvest into digital innovation. And that's really based on identifying what the large enterprise programs have done to invest in digital. You know, to earn that whole pass to talk about digital isn't necessarily rocking up and saying, let's invest in this great new digital program with analytics, AI, ML. Much of that conversation starts with saying, where do we save money first to reinvest? So I'll go through an example there. You're going to find this surprising. But when you're talking about all this great technology, it can bedazzle us. It can get us off track. It can be a distraction in some cases, because there's a lot to choose from. Be clear on why transformation is important to the customer and work it backwards. Again, I'll show you an example of this. The final one, which I'll probably scream from rooftops, if you can imagine that, is look beyond TCO to justify enterprise transformation. Cost is not everything. It's something, but it's not everything. And it's really those strategic benefits to your business, to your top line, that really resonate at board levels. So in light of that, I split the agenda into 3 sections. The first section is the business impact of cloud. And I'll share with you the example of GE and how they transformed. The second area is, based on the learnings about GE and several other enterprise accounts, how do you frame an enterprise transformation program? What are the things to consider? And finally, the enterprise transformation business case journey. So this isn't about how to build a business case or how to build a TCO. The focus here is a journey. You know, how you go from a TCO, how do you disrupt a TCO? In other words, do you expect your TCO to be ripped apart by stakeholders beyond IT? Then how do you bring it back up to build a board level business case for transformation? Most presentations start with a positive number. They typically say you're going to save X percentage or you're going to grow by Y percentage. This is probably the opposite message here. 70% of complex, large-scale transformations or change programs don't reach their goals. But this is why this is an interesting conversation. I mean, we wouldn't be sitting here, I wouldn't be having this dialogue with yourselves if it was easy. But given that you're here, let me share some insights. Let's fast forward to the GE example. So here's an example of where they went from legacy to digital, but there's some key takeaways here. Let's look at the scale of how big this program was. We're talking about 9,000 plus workloads migrating and transforming to AWS and retiring technical debt and shifting that to a digital workload. When they achieve this over the 3-year period, they'll go from 34 data centers down to 4. Now again, I'm not going to bore you with how much they saved or what they did. I just want to give you the idea of the scale of the operation here. Because you're going to find many presentations over the course of X number of presentations about how much people saved or what the percentages are. The real takeaway here is the scale of how you can do it with AWS and some of the characteristics. So when I looked at those data for the GE case, this is what the data bubbled up. And these aren't the only patterns, but this is some of the patterns that I realized from the data itself that made the GE case interesting. Or what are the characteristics of an enterprise transformation? Because it's a pretty loaded expression, enterprise transformation. It can conjure many thoughts. But here's what the data said. So forget what the definition is. The data said, number one, that there's multiple business units involved in enterprise transformation. Right, so it goes across, in this case, everything from oil and gas to something as small as transport and a software center of excellence. Now you can imagine here the conversations that went around here. The second point talking about conversations is proving multiple use cases. And this is key. You know, when we go across multiple business units, it's not enough to say you're going to save money or you're going to transform with AWS or you're going to lift and shift. The use case has to be specific to that business unit. And the third pattern across these business units that was interesting is every single one of them had a legacy blocker to digital. It wasn't a case of simply just lifting and shifting per se. You're going to find things like highly coupled applications that are difficult to move, or mainframe servers, or even more to the point, organizational limitations or political constraints. To get past those, one of the key things the data said, which to my surprise actually, was a lot of these business units had technical constraints that could be quantified in dollars and cents. And once you identify the size of the prize based on the workloads, and you start quantifying, you get past the emotional barrier. Okay, next point. After you identify the saving, this is your hall pass to then talk about where do you want to invest this saving to. You know, the interesting conversation isn't, look, let's save some money. Penny saved is a penny earned. It's not necessarily true in this case. The interesting conversation is where do you want to reinvest this money? It's highly unlikely they're just going to sit in their laurels and cash it. But that hall pass is earned when you say, look, we're going to save X million. How can we help your top line growth? Or how do we get you to market faster? And I'll get to some of that in the last section of the slide deck. But the key point here is investing back in digital innovation from the savings you've made. And the final pattern is the hockey stick level of momentum in terms of the shift from legacy to digital. You know, this wasn't a big bang, and the vast majority of the transformation programs that I've worked on and reviewed, and there's about 300 of them that I looked at within AWS, the vast majority of them had a similar pattern. In GE's case, they wanted to go from 20% legacy downwards. So this is their short to medium term strategy, and they're shifting the whole shift between legacy and digital. Again, let me just share with you a personal observation from this. Okay, so you see the hockey stick pattern. That's not the interesting side story. The interesting side story is, you know, having reviewed similar transformations or worked on transformation programs in other companies, which I've worked at, like Oracle, Accenture, or Gartner, what's interesting for me at AWS is the level of scale. You know, every major organization talks about transformation. You know, what's different at AWS is scale. Number two, maturity. Number three, the migration tools that are available to do this. And number four, the innovation that's very accessible. You know, I got really curious when I saw this fourth point, because when I looked at the data, it highlighted that enterprises were adopting things like AI, ML, analytics, at a far faster rate than I've ever seen any other vendor or any other organization. And it got me curious as to why. When I uncovered the data, I couldn't find anything, to be perfectly honest. But the one thing it was an observation of why this innovation is accessible. It's because it didn't require an army of salespeople to add a database option. You could access it directly through a click of a button. That click of a button is the business case itself. If you really want to break it down, if you want to stop listening to the rest of the presentation, the whole business case is you can click the button, get that innovation, run a POC, you're good to go. You probably save 20 meetings with a sales rep and X number of days trying to review it. Your business case is done. But don't stop listening. I got some more slides. So, key message from this first section. Identify the savings, shift it toward digital innovation. It earns you the hall pass. Second part, so once we've gone through the GE case study and I've shared with you some of the patterns of an enterprise transformation, how do we frame this? Start with a few, let's just set the tone here. Change is inevitable, except from a vending machine. I think that's a very North American term, though. But here's one's interesting from, again, another American quote. If you want to make enemies, try changing something. Right. In a leaking boat, energy devoted to changing vessels is more productive than energy devoted to patching leaks. Warren Buffett. Think about it, right? You're on a sinking ship. You're going to jump on another ship, or you're going to start patching every leak that you can find. And the quote's applicable here for an enterprise transformation. The risk is there, but the reward is for the risk takers, and that's why the transformation requires careful planning. The other thing from this, again, the unspoken, look, this is not easy. If this was prescriptive, or if I came in here and said, look, there's 13 steps, 7 steps, 5, pick any number, your even number quotes that you find, then we wouldn't be sitting here because everyone would have done it. Right? There's no prescription steps, but what there is a set of frameworks and a way of thinking about this. And I thought that would give this more justice than giving you a set of prescriptive steps. If you think of enterprise transformation kind of like an hourglass, you're racing against time, against obsolescence or almost uselessness or being disrupted. Some of the things that are universal in enterprise transformation, regardless of your framework or your tenet or any of those great things you hear in management speak, here are some things that are consistent, as per Miriam's talk this morning. Customer loyalty, revenue, cost, margin, innovation, growth. These are all things that will never go away. And if you think about those as your top bit here is your vision. Then you have your bottom line savings or your ability to execute. And your role here is to build a strategy that links the two together to essentially maximize margins. And what you find from MIT is a great quote of, they've done a study across digital leaders. What's the size of the prize? Digital leaders are 26% more profitable on average than industry peers. Okay, so let's break this down one level deeper. So the concept from before is, look, you're here to create some common tenets and principles that don't change. But then this is the typical journey you find. We often see transformation starting from an IT objective or an IT-inspired solution. Someone rocks up and says, let's do analytics. And they start building a small team. They start building an operating model very early in the game. Then they pick a vendor. Then you do, he's laughing. Then you do a POC. Then you sell it to the business. And you're suddenly a rock star. And then you're at status of a rock stardom. Then you sell it to the CEO. Right? Okay. What's the so what? It's typically These transformations are a great example of silos being created with new technology. If you want to create a silo with amazing new technology, this is the way to do it. Because it typically relies on one business unit or one area in the business that's trying to justify what they're trying to do. It doesn't work at scale or at enterprise levels. Let's say you flip this on its head. Let's turn the hourglass around. Start with the why. Look, you're never going to find a CEO in, try this, try finding a CEO that doesn't have a digital agenda. Let's review that question in 1 year's time, and let's see if that CEO, if this question's still relevant, or if that CEO is still there for that matter. But fact of the matter is, try finding a CEO. This is something you can cling on to, right? Let's just talk about basics here. Why change? One reason is because the CEO said so. His job's on the line. Okay, so every CEO has a digital transformation agenda. Beneath that is the business, or the business strategy, which is typically where you identify where change to start from. And this is a key point. I'll get to this in the next slide in a lot more detail. But the second point is, what are the business leaders, or the LOB, what benefits are they going to gain from the change? What's the so what for them? Okay, so the CEO is going to transform digitally. He's going to increase his profits. He's going to increase his margins. What does it mean for the business units? And here's where you have to identify some key sponsors across the business unit domains. So kind of like in GE, we went through every single business unit and we identified the business value at an individual BU level. Then we built a solution blueprint, largely based on AWS's CloudFormation and how you can build a templatized view to scale this out. And then we built a center of excellence to do this at scale. So the flow here starts with the why at all stages. What you typically find, we start with the what typically, or the how. We'll say, someone from IT will rock up and say, hey, we need to do this new database service because it's going to run 50% faster. That's a what. Why are you going to do that? There's this concept called 5 whys. You can get to the truth if you ask 5 whys in sequence. I don't recommend you doing this with your kids because my daughter hates me for it. But that's how you get to the truth of what someone really wants or what the true business objective is. So if I break this down in terms of one level deeper here, because so far I've talked to you about, hey, this is the concept. This is the sequence of the questions that a board would typically want answering. Okay, Muneeb, what are the deliverables? What do we actually look like? What should we actually investigate? The first thing we do is, to answer why, is build a case for change. Answer the why of why we're actually doing this for the customer. Is it because if we do this change, the customer will be more loyal to us? And what are the technologies that underpin that? You may find that this is obvious, right? But ironically, when you're doing this at scale across dozens of people in this enterprise transformation program, you'd be surprised. It's like Chinese whispers. You'll get a different interpretation of what that transformation means. And that's why building a case for change earlier on is key. Okay, next point. Even though it's a great idea, it may be too risky. Anyone here from banking, perchance, or worked in the banking industry or financial industry? Hands up. Right. So even though it's a great idea, maybe too risky. Do the risk assessment much earlier on. Build the confidence and do that risk analysis. And send that message and communicate it. It doesn't mean you do it within your own BU, but make sure everyone else knows that, hey, what I'm doing is less risky. Because the first thing you can be shot down with is just someone saying this one statement, it's too risky. Instant shot down. Build a business case earlier on. A directional business case is key. Show the size of the prize earlier in the game. Second one is, where should change start from? This is an interesting one. It's because it's typically either from an application down perspective or an infrastructure up. And the patterns for that you typically recognize is when you look at an application down, it's typically the business saying we need more functionality or something quicker to run for the end customer. When you see it's infrastructure up, it's typically someone shouting saying it costs too much, it runs too slow, and hey guys in the business, if we change this infrastructure, it's going to make your life a lot better. So that where point and identifying that earlier on is one of the key success factors according to the data. Some of the largest transformations have identified the trend of where to start from as a key factor of where they got value and that rate of hockey stick. Second one is business and IT readiness. I'm not going to go on about what that typically means in a lot more detail, but what I will say is make sure you get consensus from both business and IT and do anecdotal analysis in the worst case scenario to say why they can be ready or why they can't be ready, and have those up front. Which leads me to my third point, sourcing strategy. Typically, sourcing strategy is done a lot later. In other words, who should deliver this? In-house, external, how much in-house, how much external. Have a point of view of the sourcing strategy a lot earlier. The different thing about AWS is we have a partner network where you can work with a range of partners, not just your usual suspects. There's thousands in the marketplace in the partner network that you can work with that are, in some cases, more agile, more nimble, more accessible, have templates, have a proven history in implementing AWS in specific use cases. And that marketplace is one of our unique differentiators. Then you get to the what. Okay, this is your solution. This is your service. This is the cloud services that you're choosing to build up to answer the first 2 points. And then you talk about the how. This is where you talk about how you're actually going to do it, a program plan, your IT operating model. How do you go from the business having a demand or this new idea to filter it through to come out at the end with IT delivering it? That portfolio management approach is very different in AWS, simply down to the fact of the scale and speed it works at and the level of fullness of service that it provides. But I still haven't told you why AWS. Because in reality, you could apply this to anybody. The why AWS is key. There are very few, look, we don't take for granted that we're a market leader in this. And we don't sit on our laurels to think that that's the end game here. What we offer you is innovation that's easily accessible, at scale, that's cost effective, and that delivers value and results a lot earlier on. Harnessing this advantage to your advantage is key at every stage. So implement, rather than just doing a lift and ship or EC2 or S3, which is storage and compute, show an early example of how advanced security services from AWS, for example, could be used a lot earlier on. Start implementing examples or POCs of AI, ML, analytics, and it's very simple to do this per se. Start doing that earlier on every stage, because that's what will get you buy-in from the business. The business doesn't really care about server and compute per se. They want to see visible results. And using those AWS services enables you to get those visible results a lot earlier on. Just to recap. So again, why? Why is this transformation important to the customer? Again, simple technique, try 5 whys. Why? Typically when you get into a third or fourth, it's pretty annoying, but you pretty much get to the root of why you're doing this. But this is what will help you be clear when you start building your board level presentation. The topic was the business impact of cloud adoption and transformation. Business impact, in my view, is about numbers. Now, that could be up for debate, but from my vantage point, if you can't show me a number of why something's making an impact, it's marketing. And there's nothing against marketing people. It's to say that this is how we can quantify it at board levels. Not everything that counts can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. I think you have to be Albert Einstein to say that without practicing it 20 times in the mirror like I did. The second point is, how many millionaires do you know that have become wealthy by investing in savings accounts? Okay, so what these basically are alluding to, enterprise transformation is a risk. Change is a risk. But the rewards are a lot higher for taking that risk. Now I'll get into the numbers of what I mean by that. So I'm not going to bore you with how to do a TCO. There are people within AWS that are far better at this, like John Enoch, who leads our cloud economics team, who can go through it. But quite simply, in 10 seconds to do a TCO, you take the cost for current state across each one of these, you do it again for target state, you take the delta of the two, and you get your TCO. Kind of like that. Typically, you find a ratio, typically at 30 to 38%, 40% saving from coming to AWS. I want you to keep this figure in mind for a second, because this is how you destroy a TCO if you're sitting beyond IT. Stakeholders from beyond IT are the first people that rip apart a TCO, let alone the competition or other vendors when you share that TCO with them. I should know. That was a role I had prior to AWS. You can rip apart a TCO because vendor manager will come along and say, you forgot about the third-party migration costs that weren't captured in your initial migration-only service. The second thing they'll say is, you forgot about the data center exit penalty. Right. Then you look at software licenses of moving to another platform. Now, this is in red because I'm alluding to another vendor. It's red because it signifies negative. So you'll need extra software licenses because you're making that move, which weren't captured in your TCO. Then you have the CFO that walks along and says, you know that hardware that you told me to buy 2 years ago? You're now telling me to write it off. That has a cost, or a depreciation write-off. The final piece the CFO will say is, I'm taking this risk, I'm setting aside X% for a risk reserve. So when he redoes his numbers, he increases his WACC, or his weighted average cost of capital, by typically upwards of 20 to 30% as a risk reserve. So you've gone from 7.7 down to negative 4.6. Your TCO's killed. There is no business case at this stage for transformation. You're never going to get a hall pass to talk about digital. However, you're expecting a however. The however is, let's redo this. So you're at negative 4.64. Over the next 5 years, how much more hardware would you have had to buy? What's the opportunity cost? You'd probably have to invest another £1 million in hardware. Because you're buying hardware, you then also have to buy less software as a result of this transformation. As a result of having less hardware, less software, you're going to increase your productivity because there's less things to manage. If you're increasing your in-house productivity, that's going to have a knock-on effect on outsourcing. If you're doing more things better internally, you're going to need less outsourcing as a result. That has a value. As a result of the migration to AWS, you can also calculate the increases in stability or the impact on downtime. And that, again, has a value. You take your revenue, you divide it out by the number of days or number of seconds, You say, what are the seconds increased by the result of coming to AWS and the stability gain? That has a financial value. Earlier in my presentation, I said, look, you can stop listening. The business case is really about clicking a button, and just that one clicking a button getting access to serve is the business case itself, because that's your faster go-to-market. It's actually more than that. It's also about reducing your provisioning times. It typically takes to provision an on-premise system or an alternative system anything between 30 days to 3 months. And in one particular case, in a large bank, I see them take as long as 6 months to provision a new service. What is the value of shrinking that down to a couple hours across the whole life cycle? Again, if you can provision things faster, you can take products to market faster. Finally, back to the CFO, you're going to have less risk because you have less vendors, less hardware, less software to deal with. Whether that be compliance risk, cost risk, program risk, and delivery risk. They're all mitigated and they all have financial values. So when you take all of these into consideration, you went from the -4 back up to 23 million pounds in benefits. That's what a board would be interested in listening to. Not this little thing here. This is only part of the story. It's the rest of this stuff that the board's going to eat up. And when I say eat up, this is what they'll question you about. This is what they'll dive deep and say, right, what's in it for us? What does it do to our share price? What does it do to our margins? What does it do to our go-to-market? These are all the things that you'll be scrutinized on. Look beyond UCO. I think I've said this way too many times in this presentation. And build a business case based on strategic benefits. How many more widgets will you be able to sell? What will your customer loyalty look like? A great example of this is a large telecom provider where we reduced the latency for customers on their website down from 3 seconds down to 0.86. That change from 3 seconds wait time of the latency of the website down to 0.86 resulted in millions of dollars of more e-commerce business on their website. That's what it's about. Concluding thoughts. Start identifying savings, get the hall pass to then talk about digital. Second part is be clear on the why of why you're doing this in the first place. Crystallize that point of what it means back to the customer. And again, look beyond TCO. Thank you very much. Again, thank you for discussing this dialogue on enterprise transformation and the business impact of cloud adoption. Thank you.